There's a specific kind of silence that creeps into your life without warning. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels like the house is holding its breath. That was the kind of silence I woke up to that morning. I didn't think much of it at first. Just another Tuesday. My usual routine. Get up before Carol, start coffee, check emails, maybe scroll through the news until the house comes alive. Everything was on autopilot. Until it wasn't. I opened my banking app like I always did, part of my new habit after we started saving for a vacation. The plan was Paris in the spring, something she had talked about since before we got married. And we were close. Just another couple of months, a few careful decisions, and we'd be there. That's what I thought. Anyway, the charge showed up like a whisper of betrayal. Lighthouse Bar, $187.46. My eyes stuck to the screen longer than they should have. It was a late-night charge, 10:32 p.m. On her card, the one I'd helped her pay off last year when she got furloughed. I tapped into the details. 2 guests, multiple items, wine pairings. I blinked. Lighthouse Bar? It wasn't just any restaurant. That place meant something to us. The first time I took Carol there, she'd worn this deep green dress that caught the light in all the right ways. She ordered oysters even though she didn't like them because she thought it looked grown up. She laughed nervously when I reached for the check, saying, "I'm not used to being treated like this." That was the night I realized I might be falling for her. We hadn't been back there together in nearly a year. So when I saw that charge, it didn't read like a business dinner. It read like a memory being rewritten without me. I didn't explode. I didn't even speak at first. I just stared at that line of text, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. That maybe she had to meet a client. That maybe it was innocent. But my stomach told me different. You know that gut-level tension, like your body recognizes a truth before your mind lets it in? That's what this was. Carol came downstairs 20 minutes later, still towel-drying her hair, dressed casually in jeans and one of my old t-shirts, the kind of look that used to feel in Asterisk Mate. Familiar. Today it felt like camouflage. I was seated at the kitchen table, phone in hand, screen still lit. She leaned over to grab her smoothie from the blender and kissed the top of my head. A gesture that used to feel sweet. Now it felt out of place. Too light. Too timed. "Morning," she said, walking toward the fridge. I didn't look up. I just turned my phone toward her and said, "What's this?" She paused, but only for a heartbeat. Then she casually set the smoothie down, leaned closer, and squinted like she was just seeing it for the first time. "Oh, right. That was last night. Client dinner." She shrugged like it was no big deal. "He was flying in from out of town last minute. I didn't even think. Must have used the wrong card." Her voice was level, breezy even. But that's what made it feel so wrong. Too ready. Like she'd already practiced this in her head on the drive home. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not fear exactly, but calculation. "You didn't say anything about dinner," I said, still watching her. She grabbed the smoothie and took a long sip before answering. "It came up late. You were already asleep by the time I got back. And I didn't want to wake you." She smiled then. That small, practice smile she used at work functions when someone asked a question she didn't want to answer. "I figured you'd appreciate the overtime more than the chatter," she added with a wink. I didn't respond. I just stared at her scarf. A silk one she never wore, now draped over the back of the dining chair like an afterthought. It was white with faint gold stripes. She reached for it without thinking, looping it loosely around her neck like she suddenly remembered it was there. That's when I caught it. A scent that didn't belong. Not her perfume. Not fabric softener. Not me. It was cologne. Masculine. Sharp. Expensive. Something I'd smell at a rooftop bar. Not in our kitchen. My heart did this odd little drop. Not a full plunge, just a dip. A warning. She noticed me staring, and for half a second, her hand froze. Then she adjusted the scarf again and casually turned to the sink. "You okay?" she asked without looking at me. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just Lighthouse Bar." "Huh?" She laughed. A sound that felt too rehearsed. "I know, right? Haven't been there in ages. Still good, though." They changed the menu, it's all fusion now. Her voice was light, but she was rushing, filling space with facts. Weird place for a business dinner, I said, still watching her. It's where the guy was staying. Said it was easiest. He's in from Seattle, some finance exec into startups. I don't even remember his name. I nodded again, slower this time. Then she leaned on the kitchen island and tilted her head. Alex, come on. Don't tell me you're jealous. Her tone had shifted now, lighter, teasing. You just got promoted. You should be celebrating, not interrogating me about a dinner. That last line hit harder than I expected. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt so flipped. Like I was the problem for even wondering. She walked over and ruffled my hair playfully. Don't go full detective on me, okay? I promise it was boring. You know how these work dinners go. I nodded again, and that's when I realized something strange. I was already backing off. Even though the doubt was there. Even though the scent was still fresh. Even though her story had holes big enough to fall through, I let it go. I nodded. I smiled. I told her to have a good day at work. I even kissed her goodbye. Why? Because denial is comfortable. It buys you time. And in that moment, I wanted so badly to believe her, because the alternative meant the ground beneath us was starting to crack. And I wasn't ready to fall through. But deep down, way down, I'd already started falling. That dinner charge should have been enough. A different version of me, maybe one less hopeful, less patient, might have stopped everything right there. Asked harder questions. Dug deeper. Confronted the cracks as they formed. But instead, I did what a lot of people do when they're afraid of the answer. I let it go, at least on the surface. But something had changed in me. Quietly, permanently. After that morning, every little detail I'd previously shrugged off suddenly stood out like a neon sign. And the more I looked back, the more I realized how many red flags I had already folded into white ones. Carol had been changing for months. I just hadn't been ready to see it. It started with work dinners. She used to love bringing me along. Said I made her feel confident. Said her coworkers respected her more when they saw she had the whole package. Whatever that meant. We'd walk in hand. She'd give me the rundown on who to charm and who to avoid. And afterward we'd debrief in the car, laughing over bad speeches and awkward toasts. Then, without warning, the invites stopped. First it was, oh, this one's just for senior team members. Then it was, it's not really a +1 thing. Eventually, she stopped mentioning them altogether. I only found out when I saw a photo online, her, dressed to the nines at a rooftop mixer, standing beside someone I didn't recognize. When I asked about it later, she brushed it off. Said it was impromptu. Said she didn't want to bore me with office stuff. At the time, I believed her, or told myself I did. But now, I remember the way her eyes didn't quite meet mine when she said it. I remember how fast she changed the subject to the weather, of all things. I remember thinking, she used to love talking about work. Then came the projects. They were always vague, something about brand launches or partnerships, or client overhauls that required extra hours. She'd work late 2 or 3 nights a week. At first, I was supportive. I even made her snacks to take with her. I believed in her hustle. But then the details stopped making sense. She'd say she was in meetings but wouldn't answer my texts for hours. She'd come home exhausted, but her makeup would still look perfect. Her explanations got shorter, her patience thinner. And then there were the trips. Short ones, mostly overnight stays in cities nearby. Supposedly for conferences or client onboarding. I never saw tickets, never helped her pack. I offered to drive her to the airport once, and she told me she was already getting a ride from someone at work. I asked who. She said it didn't matter. I found out about one of those trips through an Instagram story posted by one of her coworkers. It was a sh*T of their hotel lobby. Modern, sleek, expensive. In the background, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, was Carol. Laughing. Talking to a man I didn't recognize. Their heads close together. Their body language too casual. Too familiar. I showed her the post. Oh, that's just Zach, she said, waving it off. We were talking about flights. He's harmless. Married with kids. But the way she said it, flat, practiced, like it wasn't the first time she'd said it, made something in my chest twist. I didn't argue. I didn't press. Instead, I nodded and told her I trusted her. But trust is a currency, and I was starting to realize I'd been spending mine alone. I started noticing new patterns in our home life. Little things, quiet but cumulative. Her showers. They used to be in the mornings. But now she started showering late at night, long after I'd gone to bed. And when I'd wake up and walk past the bathroom, I'd hear the soft whir of the fan, the water already shut off. Once, I opened the door just as she was stepping out. She jumped, genuinely startled, and clutched her towel like I'd caught her doing something shameful. I asked why she didn't shower earlier anymore. She said the hot water helped her sleep, that it calmed her nerves. That was new. So were the clothes. Things I'd never seen before. Not in our drawers, not in our laundry. A blazer with sharp shoulders. Heels taller than she used to wear. Lipsticks she once said made her feel too dressed up. All appearing one by one without explanation. Got them on sale, she said when I asked. Needed a wardrobe upgrade. You said you liked when I dressed up. Remember? I did. I still do. But now it felt like she was dressing up for someone else. Her phone became another wall between us. She used to leave it on the counter while we cooked or watched TV. Now it never left her side, not even at night. She took it into the bathroom. She kept it face down. Whenever I walked into a room, I'd catch the faint motion of her locking the screen. Once, during dinner, I joked, "Am I going to have to compete with your notifications now?" She looked up and smiled. "Don't worry, you've already won." But I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a placeholder. Even her laugh changed. That might sound crazy, but it's true. Carol had a very specific laugh. It started soft, built up, then ended with a little sigh, like the sound of relief after a long day. I hadn't heard that laugh in weeks. Instead, I'd hear her giggling. A lighter, higher version. Through the wall when she was on the phone late at night, claiming she was listening to podcasts or finishing voice memos for work. I started paying attention. Not to what she said, but how she said it. The pacing, the tones, the hesitations. One night, after I asked if she wanted to watch a movie for our anniversary, she said she was too tired and went to bed early. I lingered in the kitchen, letting the dishes soak. I figured I'd give her a few minutes, then join her. But just as I was heading upstairs, I heard something strange. The faint murmur of her voice coming from the bathroom. She wasn't talking to herself. It wasn't a Zoom call. It was hushed, rhythmic, accompanied by soft laughter. That laugh. I froze in the hallway, unsure whether to knock, to speak, to pretend I didn't hear. Eventually, I just backed away, my footsteps silent. The next morning, she acted like everything was fine. Asked if I wanted pancakes, and like an idiot I said yes, because part of me still hoped I was wrong, that this was just a phase, that stress and work and life had pulled us apart, and not another person. But denial is a quiet poison. Tastes like patience, but it drains you slowly. And by now I was starting to feel hollow. I started imagining scenarios in my head. Not angry ones, sad ones. What if she wasn't cheating? What if she was just unhappy? What if I was the one who'd stopped being enough? But deep down, I already knew the answer. This wasn't about drifting apart. This wasn't about emotional distance or mismatched priorities. This was about deception, precision, a choreography of lies built day by day, excuse by excuse. Looking back, the worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was how expertly she rehearsed for it. And I had front row seats the entire time. There's a point where suspicion becomes a kind of self-torture. You cycle through every conversation, every sideways glance, every, "I'll be home late," searching for truth inside the noise. But when the evidence finally arrives, cold, objective, irrefutable, it doesn't give you peace. It just ends the guessing. And endings, no matter how much you think you're prepared, always hurt. It was the Friday I got promoted. I remember because Carol had forgotten. She didn't call. No message. No "I'm proud of you" text. Nothing. which was weird because she knew how hard I'd worked for that promotion, the late nights, the overtime, the trips. She'd been my cheerleader for years. But that morning, she left early for a strategy meeting, and I didn't hear from her all day. At around 2 p.m., the office threw me a little celebration. Some cake, a few awkward speeches, handshakes. Afterward, I decided to head home early. Thought I'd surprise her. Maybe she just forgot because she was tired or stressed. Maybe she had something planned and needed time to set it up. I remember the quiet when I opened the front door. The kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Carol wasn't home. That wasn't the surprise. The surprise was that my company-issued laptop, the one I used every day for client data, confidential files, proposals, was gone. I'd left it on the desk in our shared office. Plugged in. It wasn't just missing. The whole charger setup was gone too. Like it had never existed. At first, I thought maybe I moved it. Maybe I left it in the car or the bedroom. I checked everywhere. Even the trunk. Nothing. That was when my stomach dropped. I called Carol. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Same thing. I left a message asking if she'd seen it. Told myself to stay calm. But my gut already knew. I called the office. Spoke with IT. Told them the laptop was missing. They didn't ask why, they told me to sit tight. 20 minutes later, I got a call from legal. Alex, your machine was pinged at a pawn shop downtown. I blinked. What? It was sold an hour ago. The system flagged the serial number. Someone tried to wipe the hard drive. We've already pulled the camera footage and notified the authorities. Who brought it in? I asked, though I already had the answer forming in my chest like a bruise. Your wife, Carol Whitmore. She used her driver's license to sign it in. I remember just standing there, the phone still pressed to my ear, as the words landed like bricks in my mind. Sold. My laptop. Not hers. Not an old backup. Mine. With company files. Company property. I drove straight to the pawn shop. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit in the car for a few minutes just to breathe. When I finally walked in, the manager didn't even look surprised. She came in around noon, he said. Real calm. Said she needed quick cash for a flight. Had a guy with her, tall, dark hair, maybe early 30s. They seemed close. I asked to see the security footage. He hesitated but agreed after I explained who I was and why this mattered. And there they were, Carol and a man I'd never seen before, standing shoulder to shoulder at the counter. She was smiling. He was holding her hand. My hands clenched into fists as I watched her lean into him, whisper something in his ear. He laughed. She looked happy, at ease, like she wasn't committing theft, like she wasn't burning down the life we'd built with every casual step. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. On the drive home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even think, really. I just felt this eerie quiet inside, like someone had hit mute on my soul. That night, Carol came home like nothing had happened. Grocery bags in hand, humming. Hey babe, she said as she walked in. I grabbed your favorite pasta. Felt like making something nice tonight. I stared at her. Said nothing. She noticed. You okay? I nodded once. Where's my laptop? She blinked. Your laptop. The company one. The one that was on the desk this morning. Her face didn't change. Not at first. But I watched her pupils dilate just slightly. Watched the small twitch in her jaw as she reached for a lie. Oh, I thought that was your old one. The silver one. It looked kind of beat up. So You sold it, I said. The silence that followed was deafening. You sold it, I repeated. At a pawn shop. Today. Around noon. With your new boyfriend. Tall guy, marketing department. You held his hand while you handed over my company's property. Her face went pale. How long? I asked. My voice was flat. Empty. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. How long, Carol? Alex, it's not. She began. Don't insult me. Don't pretend this is anything less than what it is. She looked down. A few months. There it was. The final nail. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because my body didn't know what else to do. Felt like someone else was laughing, and I was just watching from behind glass. You've been sneaking around for months, lying to my face, using my home, my car, my laptop, and you didn't even have the decency to lie well. Alex, I didn't mean for it to go this far. No, I interrupted. You just meant for it to be convenient. She stepped toward me. I stepped back. I can explain. I don't want an explanation, I said, quieter now. I want you out. She flinched. You don't live here anymore, Carol. You broke this. You don't get to fix it. Not this time. I walked upstairs, closed the door to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet like it might offer answers. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark with the company's legal documents spread out on the bed. The incident had to be reported. There would be consequences, an investigation, terminations, maybe even charges. And her name, my wife's name, was all over it. Everywhere I turned, her fingerprints were on my downfall. Not just emotionally, but professionally, personally, legally. She hadn't just cheated. She'd compromised everything I'd built. And for what? A thrill? Some guy with a good jawline and a corner office? By sunrise, I realized something I hadn't wanted to face before. She didn't love me anymore. Maybe she hadn't for a long time. And now all that remained wasn't a marriage. It was a list of violations. Trust, property, loyalty, int asterisk Macy. It was no longer about suspicion. It was no longer about fear. It was facts. Timed, documented, confirmed. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was betrayed fully, completely, legally. And there was no coming back from that. The morning after everything shattered, the world looked the same. But nothing felt familiar. The coffee machine still hummed. The sun still poured through the kitchen windows. But I sat there, alone, in that same wooden chair where Carol and I used to eat breakfast together. And for the first time, I saw our house for what it really was. A museum of moments that no longer meant anything. Across the table sat the company's legal report, 63 pages. Every detail of what she'd done laid out like a crime scene. Dates, times, locations, surveillance stills. A bullet point list of betrayals, all written in sterile, neutral corporate language. No emotion, no context, just facts. Carol hadn't come home the night before. She didn't text, didn't call. Her side of the bed remained untouched. Her toothbrush still damp from the night before, like a ghost had used it. I wasn't angry. I think that surprised me the most. What I felt was harder to describe. A kind of bone-deep weariness, like someone had drained me with a siphon and left just enough energy for breath and blinking. I stared at her chair, the one she always curled up in, with her knee pulled up, sipping her overpriced almond milk latte from the mug that said, "Rise and Thrive." She once told me that chair made her feel held. I remember smiling and telling her it made her look like a queen surveying her empire. Now it just looked like an empty seat at a deposition. I picked up the folder again, flipped to the section marked confidential data handling breach. There it was, her signature on a form she wasn't supposed to sign. Evidence that she'd used my login, with my saved credentials, to access files from our company database. Not just emails or schedules. Presentations, financials, strategic roadmaps, documents that were never supposed to leave the building, and she shared them with him, with that man, the one who smiled with her in the pawn shop footage, the one she'd introduced to her friends as a colleague at networking mixers, the one who now had access to things that could damage my reputation, my work, and everything I had spent the last decade building. I couldn't help but think back to when Carol had been unemployed. She was in between jobs, feeling lost, unsure of what to do next. She cried in the bathroom more than once. I found her one night staring blankly at a spreadsheet she didn't understand, whispering, "Maybe I peaked already." I had wrapped my arms around her that night and said, "We'll figure it out. You're brilliant. You just need time." I paid for her courses, updated her resume. I coached her through mock interviews, bought her a new blazer before her final round at the agency she now worked for. And this is what it led to. Not just betrayal, but a calculated, methodical use of my trust to springboard herself into a new identity, one where I was nothing but a stepping stone. Even the handwritten note she left, the one she taped to my monitor after she took the laptop, looked foreign to me now. Hey love. Took the old laptop to free up space. Didn't want it collecting dust. Will explain later. Don't stress. Love you. I read that line over and over. Love you. 2 words that had once meant sanctuary now sounded like a line item in a budget report. I opened the drawer next to the fridge. Inside was a bundle of cards she'd given me over the years, anniversaries, birthdays, small milestones. Thank you for being my anchor. You always believed in me more than I believed in myself. I'm the luckiest woman in the world to be yours. I read them all like an archaeologist trying to translate a dead language. Each word had once meant something. Now they just mocked me. And yet I couldn't throw them out. Not yet. Because what do you do when the life you lived becomes a lie? But you still remember how real it felt. I found myself walking room to room that day, not looking for anything, just wandering, like I was trying to understand where the collapse had started. Our wedding photo was still hanging in the hallway. I paused in front of it. Carol looked radiant. Everyone said so. Her eyes sparkled like she knew a secret, and her smile was wide enough to fill the frame. I remember standing next to her that day, my tie slightly crooked, both of us swaying to music neither of us could hear because we were too lost in the moment. But now I couldn't even recognize the woman in the picture. Her smile seemed rehearsed. The frame was crooked. I moved into the office, the place she'd taken the laptop from. My desk chair still had the indent from where I'd worked nights. Her side of the office was cleaner, more organized. Neatly stacked planners, color-coded pens, a half-empty water bottle that had been sitting there for weeks. On her corkboard, pinned in the corner, was a sticky note that read, "Let them underestimate you. That's your secret we *p*n." It used to inspire me. Now it felt like a threat. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Unknown number. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I knew it was her. She'd been trying. From burner numbers. From blocked lines. Even left voicemails. Some were tearful. Others were cold. One was just 5 seconds of silence followed by a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't know how to stop." But none of it mattered anymore. The truth was already here, printed, time-stamped, notarized. She hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had handed over our life like a business deal gone wrong. Sold our trust. Monetized our *Macy. And now she was running from the debris. Later that evening, the company sent a courier with updated documents. They wanted a written statement from me. Details of what she may have had access to. A list of dates. Timelines. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot we used to plan vacations and argue over takeout, and wrote everything down. Where she stored her passwords. What devices she used. Which accounts she might have accessed. I paused after every line, not because I didn't remember, but because it felt like I was writing a eulogy. A eulogy for a marriage. And then, the final question. Did you knowingly or unknowingly share credentials, or allow your spouse access to your company devices or software? I stared at it for a long time. The answer was yes. Not knowingly, but out of love. Out of trust. Because I believed she'd never *p*nize my vulnerability. I checked the box. Signed my name. Dated it. And in that moment, I felt something shift inside me. Not a break. Not a crack, but a quiet release. Like I'd finally stopped holding my breath. The next morning, Carol's drawer was empty. Her clothes were gone. The closet door slightly ajar, like it hadn't closed all the way. And just like that, she was no longer part of the space we once called home. But her scent lingered. Faint perfume mixed with some ghost of who she used to be. I opened the window. Let the wind clear it out. Because from that point on, love wasn't a memory anymore. It was just evidence. And the case was already closed. It had been 3 days since Carol vanished from our house. She didn't collect everything, just enough to be gone. Her work laptop, some clothes, the perfume bottle she only used on date nights, and strangely, the little cactus I gave her our second anniversary. The one she once forgot to water for 2 months straight, but insisted she loved because it didn't need much to survive. It was fitting in a way. She left just like that cactus, taking what didn't belong to her and requiring nothing from me anymore. I spent those days cleaning, not out of spite, but because it gave me control over something. I scrubbed the counters until they gleamed, boxed up the rest of her stuff into labeled piles I had no intention of delivering. The guest room, once used for in-laws and the occasional sleepover when I'd work too late, became my bunker. Every hour, I'd check the email from corporate legal again, expecting something new. Some follow-up question. Some formality that would delay the inevitable. But the thread stayed quiet. Too quiet. Like the storm had passed, or worse, was gathering somewhere else. Then came the call. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me pick up anyway. "Hello. Is this Alex Whitmore?" The voice was steady. Professional. Female. "Yes. Who's this?" "This is Haley Sinclair. I know this is out of the blue, but I believe we have something in common." The name didn't ring a bell at first, but her tone, calm, but sharp like glass, kept me on the line. "I'm married to Evan Sinclair," she said after a pause. Still nothing. I waited. "He works in marketing. At your company." And that's when it hit me. Carol's coworker. The one from the pawn shop footage. The man who held her hand while she handed over my future. "Oh," I said quietly. "Yeah," Haley replied. And in that one word, I heard the same grief I'd been carrying. "I found out a few weeks ago. Hired a private investigator. Got more than I bargained for." I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen. My hand rested on the back of the chair she used to sit in. The phone pressed tighter against my ear. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, not unkindly. "Because your name showed up. In the files. In the photos. In the timeline. And I figured, if they've been lying to us this long, maybe it's time someone told the truth." I sat down slowly. Haley didn't waste time. "I've got surveillance footage from Denver. They weren't there for work. It was a weekend. Romantic hotel, upscale. I've got restaurant bills. She paid once, he paid once. Both times they used their corporate cards." I closed my eyes. Of course they did. "There are emails too," she continued, "from their company accounts. That's why I think we have something bigger than infidelity here." My pulse picked up. "You think this could go beyond HR?" I said, finishing her thought. "I know it could," she said. "And so does my lawyer. But before I moved forward, I needed to talk to you. Because if you have your own documentation, we might have a case. Not just personal. Professional. Legal." She wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was precise. I respected that more than I expected. "I do," I said. "I have reports. Confirmed logins. **TS. Even footage from the pawn shop." "That's more than enough," she replied. "Would you be willing to meet?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I didn't know if I was ready to say all of it out loud. Talking to someone who understood might open a door I wasn't prepared to walk through. Still, I heard myself say, yes. We met the next day at a coffee shop halfway between our offices. One of those places with white tile walls and minimalist chairs that tried to pretend everything was simpler than it really was. Haley was early, already seated. Black sweater, no makeup, a half-empty espresso in front of her. She stood when she saw me. "Alex," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm. "Thanks for meeting. Thanks for answering." She opened her bag and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were printed **TS, time-stamped emails, printed receipts. One photo showed Carol and Evan seated together at a rooftop bar, his hand resting casually on her leg under the table. The timestamp was from 3 days before our anniversary. "I checked her calendar," I said quietly. "She told me she was doing a client dinner in Santa Monica that night." Haley gave a bitter smile. "Evan told me he was golfing with his brother." She handed me a second folder. "That's the hotel in Denver. They checked in using her ID. I have the desk clerk statement." I flipped the page. "They signed in as a married couple," she added. Whitmore. I stared at the name. My name. My blood ran cold. I'm sorry, she said, seeing my expression. It's not your fault, I replied. None of this is. She leaned forward slightly. Here's why I think we do something with this. Carol and Evan used their work emails, their work credit cards. They accessed protected material, and I believe some of what Evan pulled may have ended up in a competitor's hands. There are patterns in our marketing language we've never used before, but suddenly popped up in a rival firm's ad campaign. And guess who used to work there? I didn't answer. Carol, she finished. I nodded slowly. It wasn't just an affair. It was corporate espionage. I think they thought they could cover it all up, Haley said. But they forgot one thing. What's that? She looked me straight in the eye. That not all of us are willing to be quiet. We spent the next hour comparing notes, timelines, login logs, expense reports, photos. She had more than I did, but together it painted a picture so detailed it couldn't be ignored. This wasn't messy. It was coordinated, calculated, and stupid enough to leave fingerprints everywhere. Before we parted, Haley slid her business card across the table. My lawyer's putting together a package. I'll include your documents if you're willing. I am. We're not out for revenge, she added. We're just not letting them pretend they didn't do this. I nodded. I never wanted to be here, I said. But now that I'm not backing down. She stood, gathering her things. Good, because they're counting on our silence. That night, I opened my own folders for the last time, double-checked the timestamps, printed everything, included my statement. I stared at the stack for a long time before sliding it into the envelope. Carol used to say I was too nice, that I forgave too easily, that I gave people too much benefit of the doubt. She was right, but that version of me didn't live here anymore. Now I was something else entirely, a witness, and this time I was ready to speak. Within days of submitting the evidence, both Carol and Evan were terminated. Their access revoked, their reputations shattered. Legal warned of potential charges. Carol flooded my phone with calls. Apologies, blame, desperation. I didn't answer. Her downfall wasn't revenge. It was the natural collapse of a life built on lies. The house was quiet now. No fake laughter. No secrets echoing through rooms. Just stillness. I drank coffee alone, for once without bitterness. Carol became a cautionary footnote at work. But I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't need closure or revenge. I survived it. And in that survival I found peace. Not because I won, but because I walked away still whole. Free.